This video will focus on basic principles for making the structure of written messages visible to readers. Effective visual design helps writers create an efficient and pleasant reading experience. And keeping your readers happy is rarely a bad idea. Much of what I'll present to you is informed by the work of Robin Williams and her book, The Non-Designer's Design Book. I'll use a passage from an industry research report as an example in this video. The report was written by a content team at a consulting company and sent to their client who develops data analytics software. Before I present principles to you, we should get clear about the context of this message. The consultant's primary purpose is a directive one. The writers want their audience to act on the recommendations that they make in the report based on the research they did. Although we lack information about any existing writer-audience relationships, we can guess that the team's power is probably somewhat lower than the reader's. Some would say the client always has greater power. I wouldn't argue with that. The audience at the software development company is not ready to accept the team's message and has relatively low expertise. The writers will need to use informative prose and graphics. In addition to building up the audience's knowledge, the writers also need to address some skepticism or sensitivity to their recommendations. The directive message is not a highly negative one, so the audience will be somewhat but not overly sensitive. That will require persuasive prose. The Non-Designer's Design Book uses the acronym CRAP or CRAP to make the most important principles easier to remember. The C stands for contrast. You can contrast shape, color, or size of visual elements. This photo of logs contrasts shape. The photo of townhouses contrasts color to show that there are two. Take just a second to see the visual presentation of this passage from the consulting report that I mentioned earlier. Here's a slightly revised version. One way to apply the principle of contrast in a written message is to make headings larger than the body text. Another way contrast typically appears in digital messages is with typographic distinctions between body text and URLs or links. They usually appear in blue with an underline. These visual contrasts signal to readers that there's a difference in the type of information just with a glance. The R stands for repetition, which is something like the inverse of contrast. The repetition of a square shape is what foregrounds the round shape. Similarly, the repetition of neutral colors, like white and brown, is what makes the bird, that's blue and orange, stand out. In the research report passage, it's the repetition of typeface for most of the text that foregrounds its contrast with the heading and with the link. The A in our acronym stands for alignment. Alignment is about creating order, harmony, visual connections between elements. Note that the right side of the photo shows baked goods carefully aligned and creates more harmony than the left side, which is not so carefully aligned. To apply the principle of alignment in the consulting team's research report, we can make the left margin justified. Although we could also align the right margin by using what's called full justification, it's best to avoid this unless you have expertise in typographic design. Many typefaces adjust to full justification in a way that slows reading speed. It's also important for me to note that you should avoid center alignment. Designers call center alignment the sign of an amateur. The last letter of the acronym, P, stands for proximity. This visual signal encourages us to see the birds as a flock or a group. It also encourages us to see the 7 pencils as 3 groups. There's less space between each of the 3 on the left and between each of the 3 in the middle. There's also more space between the middle group of 3 and the one on the right. The most common way to apply the principle of proximity in written messages is to break the text up into visual units we call paragraphs, by adding white space around a group of sentences. I've also applied it to our passage from the consultant team's report by adding white space between the heading and the paragraph that follows it, and also by reducing the white space between lines of text. The influence of proximity is one reason why white or empty space is critical to good design. Before I end my discussion of white space, I should also note that double spacing makes you look like a student. It's not something any final report or message would display in the workplace. There's certainly much more we could do to this passage in terms of applying the CRAP principles. Even with the few changes I've made, however, the passage on the right has greater harmony and order than the version we started with on the left. Let's run through the 4 CRAP principles with one more example. This time we'll view a page from a slide deck. Communication experts like Nancy Duarte would call this example a slide doc because it's meant to be read by the audience, not used during a presentation. I'll have more to say about the difference between slides designed for viewers versus readers before I finish this video. I'll also have more to say about slide docs in another lesson. In the interest of time, I'll omit the initial consideration of rhetorical context because the slide doc was used by the same team of consultants for the same client as the example we've been discussing so far in this video. Version 1 here represents the original. In version 2, the slide doc displays more contrast. The typeface and weight or size of the heading is distinct from the body text. There's also contrast between the text and an image. In version 3A, the slide doc displays more repetition. 2 headings were added using the same typeface but a smaller size than the main heading. In version 3B, the slide doc also displays more repetition than version 2, in this case by repeating 2 bulleted items. Version 1 is shown again here for comparison. In version 4, there's added alignment with the use of 2 columns aligned at the left margin, with the exception of the image, which is aligned at the right. In version 5A, the slide doc uses proximity with more surrounding white space to more clearly distinguish between chunks of text and columns. Version 5B accomplishes the same in the bulleted layout, with more surrounding white space and less line spacing to more clearly distinguish between chunks of text. Many times in the business world, experts are asked to send their slides in advance of a presentation or to share their slides after a presentation. This quote from Steve Bowman supports what may be a novel idea to you. If you chase 2 rabbits at the same time, you won't catch either one. There are 2 different types of slides. Nancy Duarte, arguably one of the most influential presentation coaches in the world today, introduced the idea of slide docs to make it clear that those messages were meant to be read, not to be projected during a live presentation. That means you need 2 sets of slides, one for reading and one for projecting while you present. You should know enough about effective presentation to understand why their design should be different based on how the audience consumes them. For instance, this slide was certainly designed to be read. Call it a slide doc. Even if you call it a slide deck, it's meant to be read, not used during a presentation by a speaker. During a presentation, this slide would encourage your audience to read instead of listen to you. This slide, however, was meant to be viewed while listening to a speaker convey the same information during a presentation. Actually, not convey the exact same information, but expand on the information in the slide. A presenter is always the main attraction. Visuals are not supposed to compete for the audience's attention and should be designed so that the presenter has to explain them. If the audience can simply read, there's no need for a presenter at all. Some of the confusion about slides meant to be read versus those projected on a screen probably comes from the fact that both types are created in what most of us call presentation software. Typically that means Microsoft PowerPoint or Google Slides. The CRAP principles certainly apply to well-designed presentation slides too. In this example, different sizes of type designate different levels of ideas with the slide title or bottom line in the largest type. The numbered circles are repeated to show they're all for testing activities. They're aligned to make it clear they're a group of like objects. They appear in different colors, though, along with the text that describes them to show that they're different. And notice there's not enough text here to encourage the audience to read the slide instead of listen to the speaker. To create messages that are both efficient to read and attractive enough to select for reading, writers have to apply the CRAP principles to make structure visible, attending to things like contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. In a practice activity during the course, I'll lead you through the use of themes and styles in Microsoft products to make it more efficient to create visible structure in your documents and your slides. Please don't forget there are two types of slides. We've called the ones for reading slide docs to make that distinction clear. There are links to terrific information as well as templates for creating slide docs from Duarte in the course.